it's Anne Bounty from Said With Love, and welcome to week 4 of the Just a Tree Sew Along or Quilt Along. And here is one of my wall hanging tops, quilt tops, that is ready and finished. So I'm going to just talk you through today about how best to sew these together to make them flat and nice, and also going to talk to you about an alternative for the background as well. So stay tuned. So these are my trees that I have sewn together in week 2, and this is the one using the Cozy Up charm pack, which is just really sweet. They're not usually colours that I usually use, these sort of very autumny sort of fall colours, but I've really enjoyed putting these together. So what I have done is I pressed this seam open between the tree and the trunk, just because I felt that it was worth that little bit of extra time, because it got a nice flat seam. And so when you're putting your tree up on your design wall to work out where they're all going to go, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute, but we're going to basically, maybe not put those two together, say those two are going to go together. We're basically going to line up that seam because we didn't trim off the bottom of the tree trunk for a particular reason, and this is it, so that these lines all line up, and the top was the bit that we trimmed. So what we need to do, if you've pressed them open like I did, you are going to need a pin, and just the easiest way is to find the seam, middle of the seam, put the middle of the seam there, make sure that the sides are lined up, and then you can sew that seam. And they come together very nicely. I'll show you what's on the design wall behind me, but basically the biggest decision now, once you've decided whether you're pressing open or to one side is fine, but you obviously then, sorry, I didn't explain that. One side is fine, but if you choose to press that way so that these are one way and this is the other way, you really can't press your seams for that seam until you've decided where every tree in your Just a Tree pattern is going to go. So it's a bit of a 6 of one, a half dozen of the other. The time to press them open means you can move them around on your design board until you're happy with your layout, or they've got, they're not pressed, and you put them on the design wall and then choose where you're going to go, and then choose do the pressing. But totally up to you. So let's talk about how we lay it out on the design wall. So this is the one that I have done with the Orchard fabrics, and as it's laid out in the pattern for you, the very top row, which is purely just background, and the very bottom row, which is again purely background, are designated rows 0 and 10, and then 1 to 9 is the ones with actual trees in them. And I put these up on the design wall and just put them very roughly, 1 and then 2 in the next row, 3 in the next row, and then try and rejig where they go. I prefer to have darker ones down the bottom to make sort of a trunk kind of feel to it. And I try, especially when it's got very light background like I've chosen here, I try not to have the ones with the lighter background behind the trees out on that outer edge of my big tree. I try and have them more in the center and have the more contrasting kind of fabrics on the outside, so that tree shape is quite well and noticeable. So I probably fiddled around for probably about 15 minutes, just sort of tweaking where I put my trees and took them away and moved them. I then took a photo on my phone and looked at it on my phone, and I find that just allows me to see whether maybe I've got too many dark bits right here or too many light bits down this corner or something. It just helps. It's funny that looking at it in real life is different than looking at it on your phone, but I found that's the best way to try and work out where things are perhaps good or not good. And once you're happy, then it is a case of taking all the pieces in the row. Now I work sort of a bit specifically, and I once I've worked out where my background ones, etc. are going as well, I don't want them to change. So I actually pick up my fabrics from the right hand side. So if I was doing this row number 2, I would pick up these 2 fabrics, put them together with the seam on the right hand side. So I'd take those 2 pieces, I'd put them right sides together, and that's the seam I'm going to be sewing. And I actually put that on a big design board. Put that one there, and I'll then grab the next 2 pieces. For example, if that's the next 2 pieces, and I'll do the same. And that's the seam I'm going to be sewing. And then on my design board, I've got those 2 pieces, so I know that this one over here is the first one, etc. And it helps me to keep my rows in the right order. Having spent all this time getting it into the right spot, I want to keep it that way. So the design board then goes to my sewing machine, and I sew from right to left, putting them together. And I actually stick to doing 1 row at a time so that I can just keep things all in the right spot. So it doesn't help too much with chain piecing and things, but it does help to keep it in the right spot in the right order. So that's how I do it. I'm sure you've got ways to keep things in order. Love to hear them in the comments of the video, or in our Facebook group, or on Instagram. So have fun with your sewing. So as I mentioned, for my Cozy Up version, I come this way, my Cozy Up version, I did a slight change to the background. So I'm going to add those, a link to that information, or those changed cutting instructions. So instead of doing scrappy backgrounds of different fabrics, this is just straight pieces of fabric for the required size on each of the rows. So makes it a bit easier if you want to just use the same fabric for your for your background. And as well, when it comes to the quilting next week, it gives us a nice lot of open space to go crazy with some quilting. Okay, so one thing that I forgot to do way back in, was it week 1 for the cutting, was talking about the hangers for the actual wall hanging. So at the very top of the wall hanging, we're going to have 3 hangers so that you can fit a piece of wood, a bit of dowel or something like that to help you hang up your wall hanging. Now, if you're going to hang yours up in a completely different way, perhaps with you know, a more traditional quilt hanging rod sort of pocket behind, then that's fine. But I just find that putting a piece of dowel and hanging it over an existing hook that's on the wall is the easiest thing for me. So the instructions tell you to cut out 3 pieces of fabric. Now I've selected the same as my backing for this one. This is the backing that I'm going to be using. So you cut out your 3 pieces, and then you fold in the long edge about 1/4 of an inch each side, so do a nice press on that, and then you're going to fold it in half, line up those folded edges, and then you're going to just sew like a 1/8 of an inch seam down that side where the folds are, across the open bottom, and down that side of the folds again. You can go across the other bottom as well, it doesn't matter, because once you've got that sewn, it's going to look a bit like this. So the folds have been sewn in, so you've got a nice double-sided piece of fabric with raw edge on one end and a fold on the other. And then you're just going to fold it once more and sew along that end, and then that is going to become your hanger. So you can put your piece of wood through there, and we're going to then sew this into when we're doing the binding. So it's going to sew into the back when we're doing our binding. So we're going to get a nice machine stitch through there, and then when you actually hand sew your binding on the back, if that's how you want to do it, that's how I do it, then it will sit up just above your edge of your wall hanging, allowing you to hang it up nicely. So that's one of the things that we need to do in this week to get ready for our quilting next week. And of course, the last thing we need to do this week is prepare our binding. Now I have done a quick video on sort of showing you the very, very basics as part of the Just a Tree videos, but I do actually have some more detailed videos on the whole binding process, and I'll put a link to those in the bottom of the video as well. But here's my lovely little dotty binding on my little binding baby, who happens to be a snowman. So that's ready for when my quilting finishes next week. So have fun, getting your sewing together, getting your wall hanging top, sounds funny, your quilt top ready, your hangers ready, your binding ready, and then we can start some quilting next week. See you then. Now it's time to start making our binding. So I've cut my strips at 2 1/4 inches is what I prefer. So I've got my strips for that. And then I have gone to the sewing machine and I've started my sewing and put them right sides together at right angles. And I've actually sewn a seam from that corner all the way to that corner. All I need to do now is trim off that excess with 2 little dog ears. And then take it to the iron and press that seam open, which I'll just do with my finger. And do that for all of the strips that I've got. And then once they're all together, go to the iron, press them in half, get a nice, good, crisp fold, and your binding is then ready for the end of our project.